Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's 7 o'clock. It's time for the show to move on. I'm Larry Weaver. I'm a resident here at Garden Spot and live over in Sycamore Springs. And I've lived in this community all my life. In fact, when I moved to Garden Spot, it was the first move in my life from where I was born. And I moved from north of New Holland to south of New Holland because my wife wanted to move south when we retired from the farm. So here we are. Thank you for coming out. I think it'll be an interesting evening. It's my pleasure to introduce Don Horning, who was a friend of the community all his life and formerly had the Dodge Chrysler dealership in New Holland. And he grew up not on a farm, but around farms and spent a lot of times on farms. And I do have to say, and one of the things that he'll admit to is in the stripping rooms of the tobacco sellers years ago, there was some unusual things would happen in there sometimes. There was usually a keg or something in there that would end the day when you were done stripping tobacco. That's another story. Don is currently involved in the Historical Society in New Holland. If you have not been over there, you need to stop there. I'll let Don tell you a little more about what's going on there, but it's my pleasure to introduce Don Horning for your speaker tonight.
Okay, good evening. Yeah, he took a story I just told him because Rich Hurst was there, and when the three of us are around, I guess stories fly. And somebody told me that the millers, that when they loaded the feed truck in the afternoon round, they would always know who to put on first. Now think about that, whose feed you put on first before you go to these farms around Churchtown. Well, you put the feed on first with the farmer that had that bottle up in the top of the beam. That way at 4 o'clock you emptied that truck out and you stood around a little bit. So that's the story I told him. So I've titled this, I'm going to talk for 20 minutes and then you're going to hear from some real people that worked at New Holland Machine Company. I was on a trip. I have titled this, How New Holland Became Known Around the World. I recount being in Paris on a trip one day, and we were going through customs, and of course, we had a thing on that said New Holland Tour Group, because that was the name of the group that was touring. A very stern-looking Frenchman looked at my passport, looked at me, looked at my wife, looked at her passport, and then he said, after seeing this, he said, New Holland Machine Company? And I said, yes. That's in our town. And he said, oh, have a nice trip, and here's your passport. So it gets you in places, the word New Holland. So how did all that happen? I'm going to talk about I'm laying the groundwork for these other gentlemen who actually worked there. I'm just telling the story. I'm going to give you 4 important dates in New Holland Machine Company history that sets the table for what they will talk about. First one is 1895. Abram Zimmerman, a young gentleman, I think he was probably in early 20s, from Martindale, I believe, opened what he called a fix-it shop on North Railroad Avenue. A fix-it shop meaning for fixing farm machinery. And where he was located, if you look out the back of the Historical Society, you see a cemetery. At the bottom of that cemetery, the first building that's there, that's the property where he opened. He opened with a barn that was disassembled in Martindale and hauled with a horse and wagon and a flatbed wagon, and they reassembled it there. And that's where he started, a very inauspicious beginning for something that he would not even begin to imagine what it is now. He soon outgrew that location and moved to the Franklin Street location. And if you know where Franklin Street is down Railroad Avenue, between Railroad and Custer, along the railroad tracks. I don't have a lot of history on that. I think it's available, but I just didn't feel that we had time to delve into that here deeply. And the reason, some of the things I'd like to know is, was the railroad track there already? Because that turned out to be providential, because later on, when the company grew, they used that railroad to ship lots of product. So that was the next space he went to. At that space, he had he was no longer just a fix-it shop because he put a foundry in. And that meant he could start doing iron castings. And he started doing things like small grain grinders and a cob chopper. We have a cob chopper in our display. Cob chopper, for those of you who are not familiar with farming, takes a ripe corn cob and chops it into small pieces, grain and cob alike, to feed flocks and probably flocks mostly, but also to feed cattle. And so those grinders and cob choppers were some of the things he was making. And at that point, I think he became a dealer in a Franklin hit-or-miss engine. What you see down here is a New Holland hit-or-miss engine. But after a while of selling the Franklin, he decided he wants to make his own. And then he came up with an idea that is something that I don't quite understand, that somebody didn't do it before, but he did it, and it put New Holland Machine Company name on the map at a very early time. If you see a water trough down here, by the way, I don't know who brought it in, it's a Mountville water trough made in Mountville. And that's just a small model of a big cattle watering trough. But parenthetically, New Holland later wound up buying New Holland, so it's kind of interesting that the two things are here. You'll notice that it's got sloped sides. Every water trough. How many people know a water trough can speak to having worked on a farm where the cattle came up and drank out of the water trough? Okay, that's a pretty good amount. All right, on a cold day in the wintertime, it would freeze and nothing would happen. It would just freeze up. You chop away the ice, the cattle could drink. So the ice would freeze up and then thaw and come down. Well, for some reason, the people making the hit-or-miss engines before used a square water jacket. This top part is where the water is to cool the engine. They used a square one, and when the water froze, it would sometimes break the casting, because freezing water is very powerful, and it would break the casting. And Abe Zimmerman decided, well, if it works in a water trough, it would work on a water reservoir in the top of a hit-or-miss engine. So he put the sloping sides, and you can see it here. And that began, he began to sell lots of product because of that. He got a patent on it, so that would keep the other people away from it for quite a while. I look at that invention as kind of a seminal as far as him getting his feet in the door and the New Holland name going far and wide. We've even heard say that he did ship some of those worldwide as well, that he shipped them out of the country. I don't know that I can prove that. So he is off and running. And so let's talk just a little bit about the trajectory of that company. It was rapid growth. Some of these things I should have said in the beginning, I did not say, that everything I tell you here today is probably can't be, it's interwoven with the stories that we hear and the facts that we can find. So there might be some things that somebody out there would say, I don't think that's the way it is, and I'm perfectly comfortable with that because I'm not an authority, I'm just telling you the stories. But he started with 2 employees. We have a picture of about 125 employees. What I don't know for sure is when, but we believe it's around 1915. So within 20 years, sometime in the period of 20 years, he went from 2 employees to 125. So things were really rolling. But something happened, and I won't go into the whole detail of it. There's people in the audience that will know about this, but they will know about the Lichty's Church problem. And what happened was, he got crossways with some things that was going on in the Lichty's Church and had to leave the church. I questioned whether how many people know something about the Lichty story? Okay. The Lichty story says that he left because of taking a new pulpit out of the church without authority to do so, confiscated it. And that did happen. It was his family that was involved in it. But I also think there's a possibility that I have read somewhere, and this is where it doesn't get factual so much as it gets stories. Stories sometimes overcome or fill in where the facts are missing. He also incorporated his business, and I know from the Mennonite Church you could not incorporate your business, and so I am not sure that he didn't get what we would have called back in those days put off from church because of incorporation. And he incorporated because this business was growing rapidly, and I think he felt that it had to happen. the bottom line is he's without a church, and I won't go into the whole detail. As a gentleman winds up in his office, this is for another day. I'll gladly tell you the story, certainly if we ever get together to museum. He was converted to a Russellite because he was without a church and somebody hit him at the right time, and so he converted to the Russellite sect. The Russellites eventually became Jehovah's Witness. I think that Charles Taze Russell was the founder, and then I don't know the migration to the Jehovah's Witness, but he was a Jehovah's Witness. He was immediately called to go to the mission field because they were proclaiming the end of the age, the end of the world, supposed to happen sometime in 1915 or 1916. And so he left, sold all his shares to people around New Holland, and that was the beginning of what appears to be a downturn in that rapid halcyon growth that was taking place, and all of a sudden the growth curve, bottom left to top right, suddenly started reversed and started coming down. So now New Holland Machine Company is on the downside of the business trajectory. He returns a year later off the mission field, but he's rehired by New Holland, but he is in the shop. We can't tell quite why this person who seemed to be so competent and so connected with what was happening, now he's in the shop. I suppose that's because there was new management has come in and times have changed. We have heard through the grapevine, not through the grapevine, but through some newspaper things and some things that were said by people that he was, as we call it in the rural area, not of much account. He didn't really perform because he never lost his zeal about talking about religion, and so all of the innovative things that he came up with before seem to not be there. So the company is in bad times. Innovation falters, competition grows. The internal combustion engine is about to replace the hit-or-miss engines, and is replacing them. So where do you go for product? And then you have the depression that is coming, and then it's here, and then you have World War II on the horizon, and by the end of the depression, it was a failing company. So much so that the stockholders actually looked into a lawsuit to force the company to liquidate by bankruptcy so that they could get at least cents on the dollar, because all the stock was owned by people around New Holland. And there would be names that many of you would know. There's stock books available that you could see. So now I'm going to switch to the next date, 1935. Meanwhile, I call this Meanwhile in Farmersville. Edwin Nolt is born in 1910. Born in a farm just to the northeast a bit of Fairmount Home, and lived there through a couple of first years, and then a little later moved over to the other side to Farmersville. In 1929, he's only 19 years old. His father gives him his threshing business to run. He didn't particularly like farming. He was vocal with that. He just didn't like farming, so his dad thought, well, he's getting tired of running the threshing machine business, so maybe he can give him that business. So he successfully ran the threshing machine business, but in 1934 and 1935, he sees a problem with the threshing machine business because the combine has come. Now, I think we have enough of farm people in here. If you don't know what a combine is, ask your neighbor, they'll tell you. But the combine is arriving. And add that to the fact that he was a good worker, he liked to work, but he also said threshing is just a dirty business, which it was. It was a very dirty business, hot, dusty. And so he actually sold or quit threshing. We don't know if he sold his business or if he just stopped. And he bought a combine because he saw this happening, and so the threshing machine, the way of harvesting was going to switch from threshing to combining, but you suddenly had a problem. The straw is in the field. behind the combine. Before, the straw was next to the barn, and you put it in a stationary baler, and you got your bale, and you got it done. Now, the straw is in the field. So what are we going to do? So he heard that there's somebody making balers. The balers had been around quite some years before, but never really reached any stage of satisfaction. But he bought an Innis baler, but he wasn't satisfied. Didn't seem to work right. He bought a case baler, but that was too heavy to pull through the field. And he decided that it would be, he decided he's going to try and see if he can take the parts off these two balers, come up with his own idea, and make a baler that works so that we can get the straw out of the field. Hay was not an issue there yet, but it soon was to become. If you think of us, those of you who are not farmers, I'll try to explain this. Why is it so important? Why is it such a big deal if the straw is in the field? Well, you need the straw in the barn for the bedding for the cattle. You can't harvest straw, or you can't handle straw the way you handle hay with a hay loader because it's so slippery. It'll just slide that back down. It won't work. You can't load it in the wagon. It'll fall off. It just was unhandy to do anything other than bale. And he just thought this is the way to go. So while he complained about the hard work in the farm and the dusty work in the threshing machine, he was a driven man and worked hard. I often said he labored like crazy to try and keep other people from laboring. He was finally successful in getting a baler that works, that holds a bale together, and so he starts building them with the help of Arthur Young in Kinzer. They made 5 in 1948, 30 in 1939, 90 in 1940 through August. So you can see the trajectory. Again, here we have a bottom left, top right trajectory going fast. He was so successful that they saw a problem. They had already maxed out their construction or their manufacturing space, and they were not equipped to operate what was potentially going to be a large, successful company. Neither of them had the skills to take it larger. And also, Arthur Young was a friend of the farmers, and he would have had to dig up farmland in Kinzer to make a plant bigger, and there just wasn't going to happen. So the answer was sell everything. We come to the next date, 1940. Meanwhile, back in New Holland, we had this failing New Holland Machine Company, and there was just hardly any assets there, but 4 people from Lancaster, from Daffin Manufacturing, who were looking for opportunity, especially Henry Fisher, the older of those group, who had hired he called them 3 young bucks, and he wanted something for them to do, and Dellinger wouldn't go along with him to expand, so he looked into buying the residual of the New Holland Machine Company, and eventually they were able to strike a deal to buy the New Holland Machine Company. Henry Fisher, Errol Daffin. If you want to know about Errol Daffin, you can talk to Diane Brown over here. She's from the same town as he was born in. Raymond Buckwalter with a big farm, a family farm near the airport, and George Delp, whose Sister Bertha worked for John Souter Auto Group, and John Souter in the back office. They bought it, and I say those little things because someday I could tell you some interesting stories, I think, about how the sale happened that are just purely my guess because of knowing how things work, because you had a willing buyer and a willing seller, and then you had connections, family connections, and you had a board of directors from the bank. There's just a lot of people that made it happen. I say this because it's very providential, because they bought the rights, they took the baler, and sales took off like crazy in the 40s. They were able to get steel when steel was hard to get. In 1947, near the end of the decade, success had caused cash flow problems. They're selling like crazy doesn't guarantee success because you have to have cash to go along with those sales. And they were running short of cash by 1947 already because the baler was selling so well. They had to keep growing. Enter Sperry Rand Company with hordes of cash that they had from the spoils of the World War II, because they were a large supplier to the military complex, and so they had lots of cash and they wanted to diversify. So they were the absolute best marriage partner, because they took control of New Holland Machine Company. It was then known as Sperry New Holland. And they, from what I gather, and there might be people in the audience that can corroborate this, but they would come a couple times a year, find out what they're doing, have dinner, ask, do you need any more money? And the New Holland would say how much, and they'd write a check and go home. So it was that kind of arrangement. It's almost, again, an unbelievable stroke of good fortune that has come along, all in the history of the New Holland Machine Company. So the company thrives through decades with the economies going up and down, product and people. Some people here today, and so we're going to hear some of those stories. That's really a 90-mile-an-hour trip through the early history of New Holland Machine Company. And so the next speakers are going to talk about some of their experiences that would be sometime after they're old, but they're not old enough to have been working there, I don't think, in 1947 when that happened. Was anybody? I won't ask. You can tell whatever you want to tell. So I will ask if there's any questions at this point. Does anybody have any questions that you thought of as I went along? I would be happy to take them. If not, we will turn it over to Diane, and she will get us into the next section here. But any questions or any comments? Yes.
Interesting comment is by 1948 or whatever, they were making
12. And don't forget, they start at 5 and 48. 30 and 39, 90 and 1940, and say your number again, 12,000. So that's an interesting. You want to see that line? It's a line that just goes like this. Other questions? Thanks for that, Cecil. Okay. I should have said, I have this book here, how does a car dealer that thought that the New Holland Machine Company started with the Baler until I started getting involved in Historical Society, how do I get all that knowledge? Well, I helped research the book for Alan Shirk, and that was the start of learning about New Holland Machine Company. So.
Get my prop out here. This is very important. We're going to have not a pink slip tonight, but yellow slip if they go over. We have about a half an hour to tell the history of people, 4 men particularly, who worked for New Holland Machine Company for almost 145 years total. That's a lot of work experience. I think we'd be hard-pressed today to find many of your sons and daughters or grandsons and daughters who could say they spent that much time with a company throughout their career. So Don did a great job of giving us a whirlwind history of the development of New Holland Machine Company. And what we're going to do, or what the panel's going to do, is tell you the role that they played in helping to make that company one of the most profitable, most successful businesses in the manufacture of farm equipment. If they're not the best in the world or the most profitable, they're up near the very top. They today, from starting out here in New Holland, They are in over 90 countries of the world, represented either by manufacturing or distribution. There are about 195 countries in the world, so if they're in 90, they have a pretty high percentage of being in the market. And I dare say that if you've done any traveling abroad, you've seen products that these men have helped develop. And we're going to hear that story. When I started visiting with the group, I said, I really need to know more about the history of the company because I didn't work for New Holland Manufacturing. I grew up on a dairy farm on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and I can tell you that not only did I milk cows, I also raked rows of hay. I drove a hay baler and got very upset when the strings would break. But I do know a little bit about agriculture, and I also spent 36 years working for Cooperative Extension Services in Virginia, Maryland, Iowa, and Pennsylvania. So my background in agriculture is not as an ag engineer, but as a farmer, as an educator. And so somebody asked me earlier how I got involved in this group, and that's how I got involved. But anyhow, I want to share with you, as I read the book, Ed said, Diane, you need to read The Innovators, which is a history of New Holland Manufacturing Company. It's a very easy read, and I found out in that book the qualifications that they were looking for when they hired individuals to work in the 4 areas of the company: design, engineering, manufacturing, service, and marketing. Those are the 4. We have 3 ag engineers up here with us today, and then we have an individual who had lots of experience in the service industry. So you're going to hear some of their stories. But what the company was looking for when they hired individuals, I think I will share with you because I think it's very interesting. They hired employees who were selected on the basis of knowledge, enthusiasm, honesty, ambition, and loyalty. So that's what you're looking at when you look at these 4 individuals sitting up here. Again, I say they have over 140 years of service between them, and they own or they have the rights to over 50 patents for new equipment or improvements to equipment that were already in existence. And so they're going to tell you a little bit about that in their story. We have said everybody has 5 minutes. When they get to 4, I'm going to hold up a yellow sheet. So I'm not being rude, but we need to keep them on track so that we can keep on track with our program. We may go past 8 o'clock. If we do, and you feel you need to leave, it's perfectly fine for you to get up and do that, because it's going to be hard to cut these men off. They have some really great stories to share with you. We're going to start with Ed Blakesley. Ed is an ag engineer, and he has the most service with the company. He had 43 years of service, and he has over 24 patents on equipment. Ed?
Thank you, Diane. Is this working? Okay. I'm from northwestern Pennsylvania originally. Grew up on a dairy farm and was involved in 4-H and FFA throughout my high school years. I was able to get into Penn State by way of the University of Pittsburgh Titusville campus in 1964. And managed to get through Penn State and end up with a bachelor and master's degrees in agricultural engineering. In 1970, I was hired by New Holland, and I joined part of their test program. Actually, there was a training program for young engineers called a junior engineer program that I started out in. And right after I started out, I'd been in drafting and a couple other areas of the engineering department for a while. And then I went into field test, and while I was in field test, managers came to me one day and said, we're in a downturn, we're interested in not hiring new young people for summer help or anything. Would half a dozen of you guys that were just hired on mind staying in field test for for a while, well, a while turned out to be,
Keep that right in front of you.
a while turned out to be about 3 years. So during that time in field test, I was involved in the garden tractor test program, which we were developing at the time. I worked on the hay tools, the prototypes for the sickle bar mower conditioners. I had those down in Florida and various other places in the test program. And I also spent about a year in combines. So after that period of time, I moved into the new design group. Hay tools, I was assigned to the hay tools group. And the first area that I worked on was the second generation of the sickle bar mower conditioners, which are known as the Haybines by New Holland trademark. So I worked on that program, and after a while I moved on into a section of the engineering department called Current Product Support as a product improvement engineer, where I helped support the product that was already out there in the field. I was involved with any problems in manufacturing that came along. It was usually my phone that rang if there was something that was not made correctly or they're having problems assembling something. And at that time, I was involved with up to 6 plants throughout the United States that were all making hay tools at the time, that period of time. In about 1980, I was shifted back into new design, where I worked on a series of what we called the draper headers. It was attachments to go on the windrower tractors to cut the grain, primarily in the Canadian market, to cut the grain and put it in what we called the windrow, the strip of crop that the combines could pick up through that program. That program was kind of short-lived because that was about the time that Jimmy Carter embarked on the embargo program of not shipping wheat to Russia, so the whole wheat market crashed, and we decided that we're not going to be in that business anymore, making those headers. So then I was shifted back into current product support again for the next several years, again continuing to support products that were out there in the field, dealing with manufacturing and purchasing issues, some product that we outsourced to third parties to make third parties make them for us. And we also were in the process of bringing in third party, what we called OEM product, types of machines like rake tedders and wheel rakes and that kind of thing that were made by another company for New Holland. And my projects were involved in getting those acceptable for New Holland marketing and meeting the requirements for the North American market. After that, I was in that group for, well, up until I retired, actually. I got to be careful what all I say here. I have 2 of my former bosses sitting here in the room. One's right here. The other one's right back there. So if I tell any stories out of school, well, I'm sure I'll hear about it afterwards. So anyway, but I was recognized as an expert on the conditioner rolls used in our mower conditioners, on the sickle bar cutting components. And after I got to the end of my career, I retired in 2013. I was hired by a company called Condex, who was one of our suppliers, that wanted me to bring my expertise to them and help them get involved with supplying additional product at New Holland. They were a supplier to us. Started in 1974 by making sickle sections, the sections that are on the cutter bar and the sickle bar machines. And I helped develop them as a supplier over the years. And then when they wanted, again, the guard that goes along with the sickle sections, why they wanted me to come along and help with that. Our guards were coming from a company in Germany that was on the decline, and they wanted to purchasing wanted to have another source for knife guards. So that's pretty much a summary of what I did. Like Diane said, I have 24 patents on various machines, and had a very good, satisfying career. It was a great place to work, very family-friendly, family-oriented. So that's about.
Thanks, Ed.
That's
Very good. Our next speaker is John Frymuth. John started a little bit differently than the other engineers. He worked for J.I. Case in the Midwest for 5 years before he came to New Holland Manufacturing. He didn't have to do the initial field work that the other ones had to do because he already had experience. But the one product that you'll probably see if you travel any place else in the world that John can lay partial credit to, I guess, is the round bale. So every time you go overseas and you see those big round white bales, you can say, I know the person who was involved in developing those. John?
Okay. So I first went to work for a J.I. Case company in Rockford, Illinois. But after I got married and we started a family, our whole family was in New Jersey. So we thought we ought to get back closer to New Jersey. And New Holland is the only company of any size manufacturing farm implements that is closer to New Jersey. So I applied for a job there, and they hired me. My first job was in the R&D group. My main task there was designing attachments for a power chassis. Another engineer designed the power chassis, and I designed all the implements. That was a corn sheller, a forest harvester, and a planter with a sprayer. Fortunately, this was just an R&D, so the company decided not to produce them, which was a good thing, because another company was making them and they didn't do too well. So from there I went and worked on the skid steer loaders, where I installed a larger 6-cylinder Wisconsin engine and a Deutz diesel engine, plus other work on skid steer and its attachments. Then after that I went to riding mowers. This was a new product for New Holland, and I designed the 36-inch and 48-inch mowers and their drive. Then I went to the round baler group, and I designed the second round baler in the New Holland line. So it was a smaller baler. It was called the 845, and several years later, well, probably more like 6 or 7 years later, I came back and redesigned it to the 849. Then I became a test engineer on round balers, traveling around the country and overseas testing and solving round baler problems. In May 1995, I retired. After retirement, I came back for several years to write operator's manuals and repair manuals. I have a couple of patents down there on the table, and I was going to explain a couple of them to you, because they're hard to read. You have to understand patents. One of my patents was a spring-loaded bar on the back of a round baler. On early round balers, when the bale chamber was full and wrapping was underway, the operator would back up and then eject the bale so he could pull forward to clear so the tailgate would clear the bale when closing. The spring-loaded bar was installed behind the baler. When the baler came out, it pushed the bar to the ground. As the bale rolled over it, the bar sprang up, kicking the bale rearward and giving space to close the tailgate. This eliminated the need to back up every time you made a bale. The other patent is eliminated the need to shut off the tractor power takeoff every time you made a bale. Normally, before ejecting the bale, the operator turned off the PTO to prevent scuffing the bale as it came out of the chamber. The patent installed a clutch on the drive for the upper apron that operated when the tailgate opened. Thus, the PTO did not have to be shut off either. So those are two patents that are down there. Then I also have a specifications manual. The engineer, after he designed the machine up, and before it would go and get approved by a field test to be making them for sale, you had to write specifications. One's down there. And it was strictly the engineer's job to write all the specifications, features, everything else on the baler. And that's it.
That's it.
Yep.
Good. I forgot to say, John had 35 years of service and 13 patents. And you heard him say that he was overseas working with some of the equipment too. And I think all of the men had the opportunity to represent the company in different manufacturing facilities internationally, because they were all greatly involved. And you also have heard a couple of them say, after I retired, I went back to work for the company in a different position. So, and I want to get into culture a little bit later. Our next speaker is Larry Neppert. Larry has 37 years of service, and he also has 13 patents. Right?
Okay, good evening. I was raised on a 320-acre farm in Fulton County, Pennsylvania, where we raised cows, pigs, sheep, chickens, and we had 2 workhorses. We raised corn, small grain, hay, up to 11 acres of potatoes, which we picked by hand. You can imagine picking that many potatoes by hand. Anyway, at that point in time, we had a 1937 Alice Chalmers Model WC tractor. I attended a one-room school through the 8th grade, walked 1.2 miles each way, had no snow days. Never heard of that back then. Had no way to let us know in the first place. Anyway, that school is now restored and part of the Historic Society of Fulton County. Then attended Houstontown High School, which is now known as Forbes Road. As Ed mentioned, I also did work with FFA and 4-H. Took calves and pigs to county fairs in that area. Had 2 brothers, and I was the youngest. And anyway, both of them were in the service during the Korean War. So I was very much involved in all the farm work at that time. Dad was somewhat a progressive farmer in that area. He bought a first automatic square baler in that area, a New Holland Model 66 with Wisconsin engine that could not be started when the engine was hot. So we just left it idle when traveling between fields. The following year, he traded on a PTO-driven unit. So I did quite a bit of custom baling with that unit to neighboring farms. And he also bought a Alice Chalmers Model 60 combine. It was noted earlier about combines and what they do. There again, we did custom combining for neighbors. My job was to ride on the bagging platform, tying bags and sliding them down the chute at the appropriate location. A very dusty, hot job. Then I attended Penn State Altoona campus for a 2-year course. Graduated in May 1957 with a degree in drafting and design technology. Started at Spray, New Holland, June 24th, 1957, at $1.70 an hour as a draftsman. Promoted to engineer trainee in 1960, design engineer in 1962, field test engineer in 1963, service engineer in 1965, which was part of the marketing division, product test manager in 1968, and then project engineer in 1977 until retirement. Took early retirement January 1st, 1993, then worked 1.5 years as a consultant on Baler cost reduction, so a total of 37 years. As a draftsman, we made drawings of machine parts, sent them to the engineering shop for manufacture, and they went on test machines that then went out into the field. As a trainee, designed the simple parts and made drawings of same. Design engineer, did more complicated design work. I did a lot of design work on the Model 450 and 455 mowers, and got my first patent there on a very simple device for holding the cutter bar in the transport position. Field test engineer, tested various hay tool products, especially the 460 hay bind. And that was a great farming advancement, almost as important as the automatic pickup baler because the hay bind done three jobs in one operation. Did the cutting, the cracking of the stems for faster drying, windrowing if desired. Did a lot of testing in Texas, El Centro, California, Florida, Tennessee, New York, Michigan, New Jersey, and of course Pennsylvania. Plus made monthly trips to the Belleville plant. As a service engineer, I trained all of our field service personnel on the operation, maintenance, and repair of the hay bind, plus other hay tools, plus the 340 and 350 grinder mixtures. If field service couldn't solve a problem, I would get a call and in very short notice have to head out to the field wherever it might be to help alleviate whatever the problem was. Only one time was I threatened with bodily harm on a machine that didn't live up to its product claims. That was a grinder mixer in Canada that the salesman should not have sold that particular model. As product test manager, I was responsible for balers, manure spreaders, grinder mixers, combines, skid loaders, garden tractors, and equipment, overseeing 3 supervisors and around 30 personnel. Much travel, including 6 weeks in Europe. As a project engineer, I worked on the Model 70 twin rotor combine, which is a new advancement here in the United States with the twin rotors and related equipment. I specialize in working on the feeder house that transfers the material from the cutting bar to the feeder and then on into the combine. But if a stone or a metal object was picked up off of the ground, whatever, it could do extensive damage to the combine mechanism. So we developed a trap door that let the foreign object drop out on the ground. It would send an electronic signal and would release the trap door to let that object drop. My part was the mechanical mechanism that opened the trap door. And there were 2+ patents involved with that. With testing of the combines, I traveled to California, Arizona, Kansas, Montana, Dakotas, Canada, and 6 weeks in Europe. And also visited the plants in Lincoln and Grand Island, Nebraska. The last 4 years as project engineer, at my request, I was responsible for all the manure spreader development. This move limited my traveling. During that time, I worked with a company in Chicago to develop a new spreader floor. This floor was made from recycled plastic water and milk jugs and sawdust. This material is almost indestructible other than melting or burning from heat. The advantage of this is the floor slats do not freeze to it like they did to wood. So it was a huge improvement. There again, I got at least 2 patents with the design work there. In conclusion, it was an interesting, challenging career, always working in the agriculture field. But I'm still close to farming today as my nephew and sons operate the home farm and also some farm property that I own. In total, I traveled, worked, or observed in 32 states, 3 Canadian provinces, and 3 countries in Europe. Just a side note here that the others haven't mentioned, but it was a great company to work for. In the early days, we got a Christmas bonus in silver dollars, up to 100 silver dollars, and the president shook every employee's hand, whether it was 2,000 employees or whatever. He made it a point of shaking everyone's hand and wishing them and also we had picnics at the community park, which there again was something that was unheard of that day, and they still have family gatherings today, but nothing like they were back at that time. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. Our final panelist tonight is Fred Brownlee, and he is working the cleanup spot. And I think it's very appropriate for him because that's what he did in the company. When I talked to Fred, he said, I'm not an engineer, I don't have the degree, and I don't have any patents, I don't know what I can say. Well, I've talked to him on several different occasions for an hour or so. He has a lot to say about his stories. He was probably one of the most important people in the company because he was the one who would go out into the field and clean up the problems that these people's equipment wouldn't function properly. They would get a call, as Larry said, back in the company, after it had gone through appropriate channels from the dealer, from the mechanic to the dealer, the regional rep, and then all the way up to headquarters. And Fred was one of the ones who would go out and work with the farmers and try to resolve those problems, bring the information back to the company. He also was one who could go back to the company and say, I've been hearing this about a product, we need something in this area, or we need to improve this way. So his role, though he was not an engineer, did involve many of the characteristics and qualities that these men were responsible for in developing the equipment. So Fred is going to tell us a little bit about what he did in his role as a service representative.
You have to tell me how to use it.
Use this one.
Do you hear me in the back? I said with the role I played, I kind of have to start a little bit early in my life. My dad had 2 children, me and a sister. We lived, he rented a farm, but he had ideas of what he wanted to do later in farming. So end up, my mother, birth mother, died when I was 5 years old, and my sister was 4. And at the same time, my dad had put money down on a farm to buy. And he went ahead after my mother died, and he didn't have, at that time, he had a car, but he didn't have a tractor. He had a team of horses and a sled with runners on to haul stuff. And I remember moving to our first move on the sled, going down the dirt road on the horse team pulling the sled. And from there on, my dad bought the farm. He started to clean it up, planted a lot of hay and corn. And from then on, he just kind of grew. He ended up with 2 more farms, and he had put 3 farms together. And so that was kind of some early background. But after a few years, he started buying machinery. He got a new farm-oil tractor, H. He bought some equipment to go with it. And one of the equipment he bought, he needed some help getting hay in one year, and he decided he needed one of those new fancy balers. He bought a New Holland baler. I think it was called a Model 76. You can tell its age a little bit because it was like the 2nd or 3rd model that the company built. Had a pickup on the left side, the pickup where the hay went in. It was on the left side, not the right side. And we baled a lot of hay with that thing. It made probably the best hay bale, square and even and so forth, of any of the balers that New Holland ever made. I saw that was a great thing. But then I used it, learned to use that when I was probably 14, 15 years old. And not only using it to bale hay, but then I had to fix it when it didn't break. And so I learned how the knotter works and all those gadgets that made people thought was magic when it was tied to its own knots and spit the bale out the back and it could. So that was some of my early, and I said I was only about 15 years old that way. I was active in the FFA in high school, in 4-H, showed cattle, did practice backing up a wagon, 4-wheel wagon. It's always something to be proud of if you can do that. Things like that. And as early get on, the ag teacher and the 4-H leader both kind of promoted me to go to college. And the bottom line is I kept saying I didn't need college. I knew how to do this stuff already. And so I didn't go to college. Although the ag teacher, for example, took myself and a couple other young men to State College. And we had a half a day off. We were judging, learning to judge things and so forth up there. And had a day off, and we rented bicycles and was riding bicycles, going around the inside of the stadium. No games going on. Going around there, and I ended up crashing in the wall, bent the front wheel into the back wheel, and so forth. And of course, at that time, I couldn't pick up bales of hay and stuff like that. And it was in the spring. And my dad was, since I was an only son, he was counting on me doing a lot of the bale handling, the work. But I ended up running machinery all summer. I mow the hay, rake the hay, and then bale the hay. And that way I learned a lot with equipment and other things. So I'll just advance forward a lot. Excuse some other things. I worked at some other small jobs and things wasn't working right on the farm, and picked up the paper one day, and here's an ad from no name on it, but said a farm machinery manufacturer is looking for a factory serviceman. And I recall looking at that and saying, I think I'd like to do that. And I answered the ad, and I got a letter back. It was a New Holland machine. My wife said at the time, well, you're probably not going to get that job because you haven't had any college. Well, I said, I'm going to check it out. Well, I went to, they told me a day to meet a couple people in Western Pennsylvania at the truck stop. I can't think of the name of it. But anyway, I went there and met them, and out of 8 or 9 applicants, I ended up getting a job. So but they wanted to see me on Mr. Cope to see me in New Holland. So I think my wife came with me. We came over to New Holland, looked at that, and they said, everything's a go. This is the date. We want you to move to New Holland for a training period. So I thought, well, that's good. We got moved to New Holland. The day I moved to New Holland, there was another company there represented gearboxes on these balers. And I brought some books up here that have pictures of balers and stuff on them. I thought they had I've dumped one of them on here too. But anyway, after I moved in, and that particular day, I was working with that representative from the gearbox company. Had to take it apart and show how. So it made me the only New Holland serviceman that had ever repaired one of those gearboxes. It was a self-propelled baler that didn't have to have a tractor with and stuff. And they was concerned that this gear in there would lock up, and it could cause an accident to run off the road or something. The gearbox would lock up. Well, the machine company is just about as wary of injuries, service problems as car companies are. And it ended up, at the end of that day, I said, well, they got to check on 4 or 5 of those machines. And they was trying to figure who's going to do this. And I said, well, why don't you let me do it? And they said, really? When do you want me to start? Well, I want you to leave this evening. And we just moved to New Holland the day before. Well, my wife wasn't very happy when I said, pack my case, I'm going. So I went out through Ohio and back up through Canada, and I think 5 or 6 machines. I checked them, and I got home by Friday. And that was the beginning. Ever since that, when I was working for New Holland, I ended up on the road doing something. Started out, I got moved to Florida to be responsible for equipment sold in all of Florida and half of Georgia. I got, from there, I got promoted to go to Memphis, Tennessee to be over that same job, to have 5 people under me there, or 5 states. I think it's 5 people too. The other thing was that I kind of forgot was the year I went to Florida was when the company came out with the combine. Bought the combine in Belgium, had the company, so they come back with the combine, and not only what I had to learn in the training I had, now I also had to include the training or the problem solving on the combine. So I moved on from there to one of the things I think Diane maybe said it. I was responsible for solving the problem that the dealer couldn't solve, and the dealer would call in and try to get the solution, but when they didn't get a solution, they called the service rep, and it was me. You didn't only have to fix the problem, but sometimes the problem was the operator. Didn't operate it right, and you had to be careful what you said. Later on in life, I know at least 2 times for sure, I think it was 3, where the serviceman that worked under me had been there to solve a problem and got run off. And we not only had to solve them, but sometimes in the Memphis office, we also had the credit department. So one day the credit come to me, and he said, Fred, I need you bad. There's this farmer up in Kentucky he's really upset with his machines, and he run the serviceman that had called on him, he run him off. He said that he told him it was his fault, and he got mad and run him off. And so the credit man said, he's not making these payments, I got to go see him, and I don't know what to do. I want you to go with me. Well, I didn't know what I was getting into, but I went with him. When I got there, I said to the farmer when I got there, told him what I was there for. He said, you'll run that machine and see what I'm talking about, won't you? And I said, yeah, I'll run your machine. So I ran his machine, started running it. The first round down through the field, it was a swamp, low-laying area, and I got the machine stuck in mud. The machine was stuck, so he didn't get mad at all. He just went out and said, we have to do something to get out of here. So he went and got his tractor, one of his tractors, hooked onto it and got the tractor stuck. So we were there all day getting him out, and didn't get the combine out at all that day. He said, leave it here overnight, and I'll get tractor, or a big tractor, and after the ground freezes, I'll get it out. Well, I said, okay. Well, then, all this time, the salesperson, or the credit person, was standing back by the fence row, watching what was going on. And he said, what are we going to do? What are we going to do, Fred? You know, we came to get money. I said, well, ask him. You come for it, ask him. And the guy said, well, I don't have any money. You can't get a peanut or whatever out of it's not dairy. He said, you can't. And he said, when they come back or tomorrow, I'll get the tractor out. And he had 2 combines. He said, I'll get them out. I'll have them set by the road, and you can send somebody after them. And that's what happened with that case. there
was it.
There were several more like that. But then, I think same time these guys did, the company had an early retirement. And I took that and was going 4 years. And one day somebody said to me, would you like to help us with a special problem? And they had a lot of equipment that paint was falling off of. So that wasn't something I could fix, but I controlled or was in charge of getting those machines repainted, mostly in South Canada. Some of them, big combines, they had to be stripped all over. First they had to get money to pay somebody, but then they had to be hauled into a big paint shop because couldn't everybody paint a combine. And we got that taken care of. And pretty good in a scheduled time. Then after that was done, I thought, well, I'm finished. I'm retired. I'm finished what I'm doing. And they said, oh, up at the training center, the man up there was in charge of the training center left real suddenly. Could I handle the training center till they get somebody? Well, that somebody, it turned out, or some time, to get somebody took 8 years. So I worked 8 more years. And during those 8 years, and I was already 65 years old, I think, but one day they had a tractor trailer, and they said, can you put diesel fuel in that tractor? And I said, I have a CDL, regular CDL, but I don't have one for a tractor trailer. Well, you can get one. You can use our tractors, and use our test track and practice backing up and all that stuff. And so I thought I always wanted to drive a tractor trailer. And so I got my license, but I didn't know how much I liked to drive a tractor. One of the first things they said was you need to go out into Ohio for some job. Then you need to go to, I was out to Grand Island because we had a factory in Grand Island. Then I also, from there, they wanted me to go to Las Vegas for a sales meeting. So I went out there and I was gone for a whole month. Then they had a following week, and the next sales meeting was in Florida. They forgot to send some tractors down there and said, what are you doing this weekend, Fred? And I said, well, I don't know why. Well, we forgot to get these tractors that we're supposed to ship down there. They were John Deere tractors, and they were sending them down for comparison. We forgot to send them down. Can you get them down there? So I left on Friday evening with the truck and drove them down there. Stuff like that. When people ask me what I've done with the company, it's just a mix of things, but it was all with the company.
So you were a jack of all trades in lots of ways.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I know these are only 4 people and they only have 4 stories. I'd like to know, are there other people in the audience who also work for New Holland Manufacturing, Case New Holland Agriculture, whatever it's, let's see a show of hands of others who work. Do we have, great. Wow, about a third of the audience. Do we have other patent holders out there? Good. I want to know how much money y'all made from those patents.
Not a lot.
I think you told me a silver dollar or something,
Well, in
right?
the early days, it was $1, but it got to be a lot more than that.
So we really appreciate your being here tonight and listening to the stories that these men have had to tell. They could go on, as you can see from Fred, they could go on and on and on. And as we were planning the meeting, I said, you really have a story to tell. I was impressed with the number of patents. Fred had over 28 years of service with the company. And as I said before, a lot of them retired and went back into consultant areas. I would invite you at this time, is there anybody who has one burning question that you really would like to get an answer to? The men have said they would stay around if you have questions you'd like to ask of them. If you have questions about the hit or miss engine, Dale is here somewhere, Dale Hostetter. He's been involved in putting a lot of them back together. Ed has also been involved in that. The other part of our session tonight was Don's piece, this piece. We're going to offer you a tour of Case New Holland. And Daryl and Faye Strickler will be out in the lobby signing up for that if you would like to take a tour of the company. And I'm going to ask Ed if he'd give you the particulars of the tour.
Yeah, I'm a tour guide. I'll be the tour guide. We have 2 dates reserved, April 11th and May 10th. And they're out there on the sign-up sheets. Daryl Groff is going to arrange transportation, I believe, to get you there. The tour starts promptly at 1 o'clock. You should be there by no later than 1:45 to get everybody organized. Couple of rules of the road. No pictures during the tour. We ask you not to wear any open-toed shoes or shorts because of the activity that's going on in the plant. The tour takes an hour to an hour and a half, depending on how many questions and areas of interest you're interested in. And it's about a mile to walk through the plant. So take that into consideration too. So like Diane said, there's sign-up sheets out there, and we'll be around here if you want to ask any more questions about the tours or anything else. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much for coming. We would invite anyone who has an interest in any part of agriculture to join the Ag Interest Group. Larry Weaver is going to be chairing that group for the next year or more, perhaps. So you can talk to Larry. If you have a particular interest and you'd like to see a program on something, then please speak to Larry or any of us up here. And I would say that we have another program planned for the fall, I believe, Larry? And that's going to be Scott Ruth, who's going to be talking about the plantings here on campus. So again, thank you all for coming tonight. I invite you to talk with any of these gentlemen about the rich history that they had with growing a company that has become one of the world leaders in the area of manufacture of ag equipment. Thanks a lot. Have a good trip home.